Nights last forever and days run away. The world makes us fly by into the grave. With every season, every change, you'll be the sunlight I feel on my face. We are timeless. 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 I'm moving, I'm standing still. We are timeless. Shadows of your twilight. We are timeless. You are the summer, we were the tide, the clearest of azure, bright as your eyes, golden skin sundress, you were the skies, and I see the color I've known all my life. We are timeless. We are timeless. Waves washing over the sand on my feet. Time is an ocean and I'm lost at sea. Tomorrow won't find us, but I still believe. Searching for you is looking for me. We are timeless. We are timeless. We are timeless. We are timeless. You are water, I am frozen. Skies are moving, I'm standing still. In the shadows of your twilight, I am falling. I am falling. I am falling. When nights last forever and days run away, the world makes us fly by into the grave. With every season, every change, you'll be the sunlight I feel on my face. We are timeless. 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 I'm moving, I'm standing still. We are timeless. Shadows of your twilight. We are timeless. You are the summer, we were the tide, the clearest of azure, bright as your eyes, golden skin sundress, you were the skies, and I see the color I've known all my life. We are timeless. We are timeless. Waves washing over the sand on my feet. are timeless. We are timeless. We are timeless. We are timeless. You are water, I am frozen. Skies are moving, I'm standing still. In the shadows of your twilight, I am falling. I am falling. I am falling. Nights last forever and days run away. The world makes us fly by into the gray. Every season, every change, you'll be the sunlight I feel on my face. We are timeless. 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 I'm moving, I'm standing still. We are timeless. Shadows of your twilight. We are timeless. You are the summer, we were the tide, the clearest of azure, bright as your eyes, golden skin.
What's up, everyone? My name is Kwa, and welcome to another LiveTALK COVID-19 series. I'm here representing the U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce, serving as the president for the Northeast region. Before I start, I want to acknowledge how proud I am with the Chamber, because it's been extremely difficult, and well, the team at the USPAACC are doing everything they can to stay mentally positive and to do their best to be impactful. So shout out to Karen, to the whole entire team, Hannah, everyone, Susan, obviously. They're doing their job, and we wouldn't be here without them. This is our, I think, 11th or 12th episode since launch during the beginning of the pandemic, and we have covered a wide range of topics from SBA PPP, EIDL loans, procurement opportunities, supply and buy opportunities, and so much more. And well, we try our best to be relevant, and today's topic is no different, as we are talking about race relations. We have an amazing panel today, so sit tight. And with that, make sure you're smashing the like button on YouTube and Facebook. Engage with us by sending your comments and questions, and obviously don't forget to send an email to us, info@uspaac.com. We're really here to help, so don't be shy at all. So with that, let's get started. So with us is Susan Allen, obviously the national president of the U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber. Susan, welcome.
Good day to you. Good to see you again, Kwa.
You too.
Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. Welcome to our live talk. This time, race relations, a national conversation. One of the pains that COVID-19 has inflicted on America is the scapegoating of people in America who look Chinese. Thousands have suffered humiliation, been assaulted verbally and physically, and told to go home. The killing of George Floyd has sparked national unrest, protests, and riots that has caused physical injury, property damage, and closed businesses, including small and minority businesses, many of which may never be able to make it back. and our Hispanic community has borne the brunt of the devastating effect of COVID-19 in health and life, just as much as the Black community. So isn't it time for all of us to come together for a national dialogue on race relations? Well, for the next hour, we're going to explore that. But first of all, I want to thank the Wells Fargo Bank, which has been so supportive when we approached them about this program. They have never been more helpful. And of course, for this program, we have the support of Northrop Grumman, PepsiCo, and Walmart. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like you to meet the Executive Vice President and Head of Enterprise Diversity and Inclusion of Wells Fargo Bank, Jimmie Paschall. Jimmie?
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you for hosting this today. It is a very sad and challenging time for our country. And, I think we're feeling it both personally as well as the roles that we play. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about my personal experience and then talk a little bit about what's happening at Wells. And so you mentioned the injustice that's occurring and the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless other African Americans. We've just lost a legend and a civil rights hero to many of us in John Lewis. And so it is a scary and unsettling time in lots of ways. And then when you look at COVID and the impacts that COVID is having across the world, as it relates to for-profits, nonprofits, large businesses, small businesses, there's catastrophic impact happening everywhere. And when we really try to think about the implications of that, it becomes very personal. So we have team members that have COVID. We have many large institutional customers that have been impacted, big companies like hotel companies, airline companies where people are not traveling. We've got a range of businesses in the mid-level, as well as many small businesses that have been impacted. And Wells is really trying to care for and look out for and adjust our policies to support everything that's going on, from the individual consumer all the way to the institutional consumer. And so, with this in mind, I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of our philanthropic giving and what we've done there. And so we've directed $175 million of our philanthropic giving during the pandemic. And when we announced it in terms of addressing assistance for food, financial instability, small businesses, housing issues, and to help public health organizations initially. You may have heard that we recently announced that we will bolster that effort by donating all of the Paycheck Protection Program processing fees that we collect. We expect that to be about $400 million. And we have announced that in the form of an Open for Business Fund, in which Wells Fargo will engage nonprofit organizations to provide capital, technical support, and long-term resiliency programs for small businesses with an emphasis on racially and ethnically diverse businesses. And this will create opportunities in the near term for access to capital and hopefully help provide meaningful economic recovery, especially for Black and African American entrepreneurs and other minority-owned businesses. Through these actions, Wells Fargo is hoping to bring financial relief to those that need it the most. I know as we look at our neighborhoods and we see small businesses that have been impacted, there's a small restaurant in my neighborhood. I live in the northwest section of Washington, D.C., and many neighbors have been doing carry out from that business in order to keep it in business during this time. And I know that many individuals and companies are doing the same thing in communities around the country to really support small businesses and do what we can to keep them stable and operating until times improve. The other thing that we are addressing as a nation are race relations. And the question really is, how do we live in harmony? Can we do that? And I think what we're seeing is a global movement, one that has been building momentum over time. And in all my years of supporting diversity and inclusion, I have not seen anything like what is happening in our country and around the world. So the support for change is undeniable, and people are raising their voices. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old son. Both of them have been out marching, sharing their concerns, demonstrating support for change. And we've also been having conversations at Wells Fargo. Our leaders have spent quite a bit of time engaging their teams in general, but also engaging in dialogue and listening, especially to our Black and African American employees at this time. You know, in recent weeks, we've done a couple of things that I wanted to share. One is that we've convened senior leaders to evaluate possible short and long-term responses to the issues of economic and societal inequity impacting the Black and African American community. And I know that many of the leaders tuning in and many of the companies and nonprofits represented have probably been doing the same. We also convened a set of leaders to talk about possible short-term and long-term responses to the economic and social inequity impacting the community. We've encouraged our employees to reflect, and many have taken over the course of this time, multiple 8-minute and 40-second seconds of silence for George Floyd. And we've continued our philanthropic donations, again, focused on small businesses and families affected by racial unrest. The final thing I wanted to mention is that Charlie has also announced the creation of a new diversity and inclusion role that will report directly to him, that will be focused on how Wells Fargo deepens our business relationships in diverse communities in terms of attracting and retaining diverse small businesses, as well as diverse consumers directly. We've also established accountability at the operating committee level for progress, both within our organization and support for external organizations. We've held some education sessions. I had an opportunity to participate in 3 sessions with members of our operating committee where I told my personal story of having grown up in the segregated South. I talked about, before I could teach my son to drive, we had to teach him to survive a police stop. And it's amazing when people hear your story, how much of a reaction they have. And it's been a very interesting time. What I would say is people are really coming together in very new and unique ways, which I think is exciting. And so in summary, we're taking time to listen and learn from employees, customers, and partners to really determine our next steps and understand what driving real and meaningful change looks like. So I look forward to participating today and really appreciate the invitation.
Well, thank you, Jimmie, for all that. I did not know until now that Wells Fargo is doing so much. My hats to you all. Thank you so much for sharing not only what Wells Fargo is doing, but also your own personal experiences about that is precious. Thank you. So now, please meet a longtime civil rights advocate, a corporate executive, and a good friend of the Pan-Asian American business community. A good friend. She is Senior VP and Senior Director of External Relations for National Constituents for the Wells Fargo Bank. Her name is Georgette Dixon. We all know her as Gigi. Gigi, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Susan, and it's great to see you this afternoon. So, Susan, I know how you like to stay on time and be focused and direct, so let's get right into this great conversation. We're gathered here to listen to our friends from different ethnic groups today about how they have experienced and observed in interactions with an understanding of and advocacy for Americans of diverse ethnic backgrounds. America is 60.7% white, 18.5% Hispanic, 13.4% Black, 6.1% Asian and Pacific Islander, and 1.3% Native American and Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian. And there are subgroups within each of these major groups, which could make this conversation even more enlightening. So with us today, we have representatives from the three largest minority groups, and they're in alphabetical order. So let's start with Nydia Ball. She's managing director or managing member of Nydia Ball Legal Consulting, LLC. Nydia Hahn, ABC Philadelphia news anchor. Jeff Lynn, co-founder of Amerasia. Mark Madrid, CEO of Latino Business Action Network, and Clint Odom, Senior Vice President of the National Urban League's Legislative Policy Office. So welcome, panelists. As you all know, America is increasingly multi-ethnic. One reason is that people around the world flock to our shores for great opportunities, and they yearn for freedoms that many of us who were born and raised here sometimes forget, or sometimes we just don't fully appreciate the opportunities that lie within America. So by the year 2040, America will become a minority majority country. And that is how I believe we have become such a diverse country with rich cultural heritage. And the heritages that represent this quilt, if you would have it, of American fabric, contribute to the energy and the innovative character of our country. So now I'd like to ask each of you to give us an up to 2-minute answer to this question. What are the experiences that you've had and observations and ideas about race relations in America? What is the issue and what's burning in our hearts? Let's start with you, Nydia. Nydia, you're on mute.
Unmute myself.
Great.
Gigi, thank you so
Great.
much for giving your voice to this conversation. And I am in great gratitude to USPAACC for pulling this diverse panel together and for creating this safe space for us to have this conversation. So I started actively investigating race and racism a few years ago. And that investigation was sparked by an unexpected incident. I was walking in Philadelphia. I crossed the street, and as I was going through that crosswalk, a driver made a turn and almost hit me. She and I exchanged words about who had the right of way, and then as she drove off, she yelled, "This is America." And those 3 words unleashed in me a fury and a pain I didn't even know I was carrying. You know, for those of you in the room who are Asian American, you know what I mean by this, but I had spent a lifetime of feeling othered and being treated like a forever foreigner. And so I finally decided to respond. And I did so in a live Facebook video. That video ended up going viral. I talked about my American experience, how I am very much an American, and how Americans come in all colors, shapes, and sizes. I did not expect that video to go viral, and certainly did not expect the tens of thousands of people who reacted and commented to it. So that viral video and the reactions to it then birthed a docuseries that we entitled at 6ABC #ThisIsAmerica. And that docuseries looked at and investigated race and racism and the diverse American experience. And we really addressed racism as it impacts all communities. But I want to go back just a moment to the genesis of the docuseries and to that viral video. And that was this dangerous and false narrative that somehow Asian Americans are not as American as everyone else. That dangerous narrative, that false narrative that Asian Americans are forever foreigners is being exacerbated right now by COVID-19. I have covered story after story of Asian Americans being shunned and discriminated against, verbally attacked, and physically assaulted by people who believe that they are to blame, or we are to blame, for the coronavirus. And so in recent months, I have been through storytelling and on social media, shining a light on those incidents, calling them out for what they are and exposing them, while also shining a light on the systemic racism and injustices impacting our Black and Brown communities. Of course, those disparities have been laid bare by the coronavirus, those health disparities, environmental disparities, and certainly police brutality, all laid bare by the coronavirus and, of course, by the tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And I think we have an extraordinary moment right now to really come together to try to amplify each other's voices, support each other's communities, and also call on people in positions of power and privilege to do the same. We cannot do this work together. We can strengthen each other's efforts and each other's voices by working together. And I really hope that we seize this opportunity, do not let it slip through our fingers, to make an impact and to really make our country the inclusive and truly equitable place that we all want it to be. So that's my story and the work that I've been trying to do. And I thank you again to USPAACC for bringing us all together to talk about it.
Thank you, Nydia. I think that is a fantastic message that we can't do this work alone. We have to do it together. Race in America. I really hope that everyone heard clearly that she has birthed this documentary. We need to check it out. Let's hear from Mark Madrid. Mark, tell us about your experiences, observations, and ideas about race relations in America. What is the issue from your perspective? What is burning in your heart?
Thank you, Gigi. And I echo Nydia's sentiments. Thank you to USPAACC, Susan and the team, and enduring partner, Wells Fargo, Gigi and Jimmie, for bringing us together in solidarity. We are organizations and individuals here who are not just compelled, but committed to action in addressing institutionalized racism. And I'd like to start off by saying, on behalf of the Latino Business Action Network, LBAN, we wish all of you watching today or at some point in the future, we wish you blessings for increasing perseverance during these very difficult times in our country. It's a United States that should have the full attention of every citizen because we are all fractured and we need healing. So at LBAN, we collaborate with Stanford University to champion the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. And our purpose is to strengthen the United States by improving the lives of Latinos. Advancing our purpose includes addressing long-standing economic opportunity gaps and disparities. And one of those primary drivers is access to capital, some of which is perpetuated by funding bias along racial lines. On the personal side, as the son of migrant farm workers who pick cotton in the South Plains of Texas and a first-generation college student, I have been adversely affected by institutional racism. I'll share the PG ones because some are very destructive and should not be mentioned here. In high school, you can't date my daughter because you're a Mexican. That's the way it is. That's the way we were raised, and we can't help it. In my first job on Wall Street, I don't know what it is about you Latinos, but we feel like we have to hold your hand. So I'm sure that you who are watching, you on this panel can relate to that sociological damage, but it is also economic. I come to a citation from the Center for American Progress. The US is in the midst of a major economic disaster. And nowhere are the effects of this current emergency more acute than in communities of color and minority communities, which have long endured occupational segregation, economic exploitation, and employment discrimination. So these factors put people of color and our minority communities at greater risk of unemployment and their ability to weather economic downturns. This will not be the last economic downturn that we experience. And the coronavirus does not discriminate. I can tell you firsthand, my mom and dad are both COVID positive and fighting for their lives. But without immediate action, the economic fallout will disproportionately affect communities of color and minority communities. So the burning issue here is the Great Recession happened and a lot has not changed. We have an opportunity to change that. And it is incumbent upon us to show America that this is solidarity, that this is unity, because that is truly American. So I'm thrilled to be here and be with all of you so that we can act and solve this time around so that we're better prepared for the inevitable downturn that will happen at some point in the future. Thank you.
Outstanding, Mark. Thank you so much. Solidarity. We need to support small business. We need to be intentional. Great messages. Let's move to Clint. Clint, tell us about your experiences, observations, and ideas about race relations. What's on your heart?
Thank you, Gigi, for that introduction. And I want to thank USPAACC for its kind invitation. I've met so many friends in this process, and I hope we can continue the conversation. I work now for the National Urban League, which is a 110-year-old civil rights organization. We've been fighting for the entirety of our life for economic empowerment and civil rights and social justice. We've basically been fighting institutional racism since our founding. And we've been focusing our programming in the areas of housing, in the areas of health, in the areas of small business. Basically trying to make sure that these large gaps that we've all been learning so much about between household wealth, between African Americans and white persons are closed. Our educational gaps are closed. I grew up in the Deep South in the 1970s. And I can tell you it was a pretty rough upbringing. Lots of fighting, lots of name calling, and I'm sure I had, well, at least one principal who told me I'd probably end up in prison and not as an Ivy League law school graduate and a corporate executive at some point in my career. And the reasons for the fights really were around institutional racism. Certain slurs would be uttered in my presence with impunity. And when someone would see I was in the room, they'd say, "Oh, not you. I mean, those people." Well, those people are me. And those people, as Gigi alluded, are about to be a majority of the people in the United States. It's already the case in California and coming up close in Texas and Florida. So this country is going to have to grapple with this issue. And I hope that it can do it in a way that is less divisive than it appears today. So I look forward to the conversation and to listening to these other great panelists and listening to your questions. And I'm going to stop talking and turn it back over to you, Gigi.
Thank you, Clint. And, you know, really, we definitely do need to listen. That's the truth. I think that one of the things that's going to help us bridge this gap of difference is going to be listening. We can't be sensitive to, we can't be responsive to the needs if we don't know what they are. And so listening, I think, is key. I want to move to Jeff Lynn, co-founder of Admirasia. Love the name of that organization. So Jeff?
Thank you, Gigi. And thanks U.S. Chamber of Commerce for having me as well. This is a great opportunity. And first I have to say, Nydia, to listen to your story, I'm really heartbroken. You see, we have to look back to the history. This doesn't happen overnight and in the day. Legal discriminations against Asians started in the 1880s. The Chinese Exclusion Act was a law written specifically to exclude one racial group from the United States, the Chinese. Today, Asian Americans who look Chinese have been blamed for COVID-19, even if they are not Chinese, or Chinese who have never stepped foot in China or have anything to do with China. If you recall, back in early February, March, Asian Americans were the first to start wearing masks due to their past experience and prevention knowledge of SARS outbreak back in Asia. And as a result, many Asian Americans have faced rising number in racial discriminations and hate crimes. Nydia case is just one of the over 2,000 reported incidents. Many of us, our friends, family, colleagues, we all experienced and subject to hate crimes firsthand. One of my colleagues was speeched near the Port Authority, and another one in the bus in Staten Island being yelled at, "Go back to your country." I also a personal witness and part of the incident in Chinatown that I stepped in to protest. I'm not alone. Many of Asian Americans step in, and not Asian Americans who visit in Chinatown step in with me and called out the injustice. Even my own company, our staff were fear of going out or commuting to work. So we started to remote working almost a month before the citywide shutdown. I was furious because there's so little help or resources available to safeguard our own safety. It's like we were back in Chinese Exclusion Act all over again. And the incidents are still increasing. I'm really looking forward to discuss more, to share more our story and discuss and learn from one another, because Asians is not alone. African Americans, Hispanics, Americans, our brothers and sisters, you guys have way far ahead of us going through a lot more pain. And today we are so honored and so lucky that we'll be able to share the same table and discuss in the forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And yes, just riveting the stories that we've heard and the images that we see of the treatment of our Asian American sisters and brothers, just riveting. And thank you for sharing that. Let's move to Nydia Ball. Nydia is the managing member of Nydia Ball Legal Consulting. Tell us what's on your mind. What are your experiences and observations and ideas about race relations, Nydia? Nydia, you're on mute.
I thought I was ready with it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Gigi. Thank you, Wells Fargo and USPAACC for putting this panel together. I have enjoyed so far meeting all my colleagues and look forward to learning from them more. So my story of an immigrant coming to this wonderful country in 1979, my personal experiences are very different than my observations over a period of 4 decades that I have lived here as first generation. So in 1979, I had never ever left India before. So this was my first out and to a dreamland that everybody looks forward to enjoying and for greater opportunities. So I had never known anything about American history, very little, because we studied Mughal Empire, British Empire, as it pertained to India. So when I came here, I came with a clean slate, without any bias to anyone, and I started enjoying my life. My first experience of course, the Indian accent I brought, which after 4 decades still exists, but a nose pin, Indian outfits, I was so comfortable in myself, the way I was. And I used to get people, oh, this is a very pretty outfit, or someone would look at me different. But again, I personally did not experience that kind of any discrimination. However, in 1994-95, when my son was in middle school, he was called racial epithets like sand and then with an N-word. And I was like, what? A little extra melanin in someone's, because he's born and raised here, that little extra melanin could warrant such kind of behavior or asking people to leave this country. But my son is a born, raised American. So where is he going to leave? And that was my first experience when I thought, so there is something here. And by then, 1991, Rodney's case was, the riots had happened and I had seen all that. But what I felt was we don't understand something until we have actually gone through it. In the sense that when my father passed away, people used to say, oh, I lost my parent. And before my father passed away, I used to say, oh, I understand. But honestly, people do not understand until you have actually gone through those. So to Clint, when he said that people said, things like that in front of him, oh, but you're not like that. So my husband, when my son was going through that, I explained to him that these are ignorant kids. So my husband and I and my son, we used to have conversation that when my husband, I married a Brit American with an Indian descent. So it's like I've lived in Britain and, lived in India and Canada. So we used to talk about his life as he grew up from age 5 onwards in England. When it was, if you all have heard about those skinheads, because they thought, oh, all these Indians or Pakistanis or Muslims are taking the jobs away. So that was his experience growing there. Because he grew up with them, they would say, oh, they would bash those people and say, but Pakis and you, and then BJ, but you're not one of them. But he was. He was an Indian background, so he used to tell them, but don't talk like that. So he experienced it. So then, of course, after I went to law school, when my son was in high school, things changed. I started participating in his PTA. I invited his high school friends home, and they grew up on my chicken curry and rice. And we used to live in East Cobb, and very affluent community. And I noticed that as I brought them home, they understood our culture. So I said, aha, that education, educate people, why I wear a nose pin, what does that mean? In Africa, it means something else. And then with immigration law, as I finished law school, I just got my first job as immigration attorney. And I have represented people from 28 different countries. So a lot of them Hispanics and South Africans and Nigerians and Asians, and you can name 28 countries I've represented. I learned so much from each one of them. And I feel I am a perpetual student. And as long as we are students, we want to learn from each other. These things should go away, and they must. As Gigi mentioned, that in a few years or many years, 2040, we will be minority majority country. And I think it's about time that we discuss all the multiculturalism in America, multiracialism and multireligious. So if we respect each other's differences, I think we can then come together and in solidarity and support each other. So I'll stop right there and move to the next question, Gigi.
Nira, very powerful. Respect. If we respect each other, oh, what a difference that makes. Respect, understanding, embracing, and standing in solidarity. Great, powerful words to help us move through these experiences that we're having today and to prepare us for a tomorrow that is a minority majority. Susan asked me to tell my story, and honestly, if I started telling my story, the rest of this call would be about Gigi. I feel that I have such a plethora of stories, but I will share one, and Nira, you actually you really sparked it for me. I can remember when I'm a military brat. I grew up in the Air Force. My father was an Air Force officer, and we lived in Long Island, New York. When I was in elementary school, I went to Barnum Woods Elementary in Long Island, New York, and all of my friends were Jewish, for the most part, and white. We lived in officers' quarters, and so there weren't very many black people, other black kids around us. And that experience was just a wonderful, my formative years of, being 1 to 5 years old, and the formative years. Learned a lot, had a great, excellent education in New York. And then when my father retired from the Air Force, we moved to South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina. And when we got there, I was transferred to a school named Welcome Elementary School. It was a white school. South Carolina had delayed they had delayed desegregating schools after the laws had passed. They just hadn't done it. So my sister, brother, and I were the first black children to go to the all-white school called Welcome Elementary. And on the first day, Nira and panel, I was called names that I thought were names of endearment because I had never heard those names before. I didn't know what a burnt biscuit was or a brown baby or an N-word. I didn't know. And so when I went home that day, and my mother said, "How was your day, Gigi?" I said, "It was great. I made a lot of new friends and they made new nicknames for me." And she said, "Like what?" I said, "Well," and I told her, and she said, "Get in the car." And she drove me back to Welcome Elementary and she walked me to the principal's office, and we had a very interesting conversation. I didn't know what was going on, but the next day, all of the students lined up and they apologized one by one for what they had said and what they had done the day before. I still didn't understand what had happened until years later, but this is the kind of experience that I think prepares us for the world that we have to live in, where people are different. And there will be good times, there will be bad times. However, we have to be the change that we want to see. And so the rest of my life has been really about bridging and convening and bringing people who are different together. And I'm so grateful, Susan, to have the opportunity to moderate this panel, because that's exactly what this is. It is bringing a multi-ethnic fabric of beauty and brilliance together to talk about something that is really important in our nation right here, right now. So let's move to round two for this first question. And I want to just dig in a little bit deeper. Nydia, can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of backlash that Asian Americans are experiencing as a result of COVID-19? We've heard the statements, we've seen, some of the images, but talk a little bit about that.
Gigi, first of all, your story, oh my gosh, that is so powerful. And the courage of your mother to take you back to that school and talk to the principal and get those students to apologize, that is just so meaningful. And clearly the apple did not fall far from the tree. And I applaud your mother, and I applaud you for the great work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
In terms of specific incidents of backlash against the Asian American community, so you may have seen this in the news, although I'm so surprised by the number of people I have spoken to, even in recent weeks, who say, oh, I didn't know that there was this backlash against the Asian American community. I had not heard any of those stories. So for those of you who haven't heard this story, in Midland, Texas, there was a family of 3 stabbed at a Sam's Club, including 2 children, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And FBI intelligence reports obtained by ABC News show that the man who allegedly stabbed this family did so because he thought they were Chinese, and he thought that they were infecting others with the coronavirus. From my own work, I talked to a man in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, which is near Philadelphia. He told me that he was physically assaulted by someone who called him the coronavirus and then said, get the F out of here. His jaw was fractured on both sides and his left shoulder was broken. I was sent pictures and videos by a woman who lives in a suburb of Philadelphia of her neighbor putting up signs on his front lawn, huge signs that said, F you, China. Not only did he put up those signs, he put lights around them so that at night he could light up the night sky with that message. A disgusting racial slur was painted on the front door of an Asian American business in Philadelphia. I was contacted by local college students who were alarmed and concerned and disheartened by a viral video that showed a Philadelphia college freshman laughing and saying about the Chinese, I think we should put something in their DNA so when they turn 13, they die. It's like a quinceañera, but it's death. And then I was heartbroken when a fellow Asian American parent told me that the children at an after-school program of Asian descent and of Asian descent only were required to wear masks. I have a 6 and 8-year-old myself, and I think a lot about the impact that these incidents could have on them. And so again, I think it's so important that we amplify what is happening so that people cannot say, oh, you're being too sensitive as an Asian American. And so that we make sure that these kinds of incidents and these kinds of sentiments and feelings don't turn into discriminatory policy as they have in our past. Jeff was mentioning the Chinese Exclusion Act, for years, and that eventually applied to all Asians. Asians were not allowed to immigrate to this country. We were not allowed to become US citizens. States enacted alien land laws, which meant that Asians could not lease or own land. And of course, there's the incarceration of more than 100,000 mostly Americans of Japanese descent. And, that didn't just happen overnight. It was the kind of sentiment that we are seeing so much of today that led to that kind of policy. So again, I think that the silver lining out of all of this is that while Asians have in many cases, over time, not wanted to inject themselves in the conversation of race and racism. More and more people are stepping forward and doing it. And I am grateful, and I just encourage our community to be loud and to make noise and to persist. But again, not only for our community, but for our Black and brown brothers and sisters as well.
Thank you so much, Nydia. I'm going to quickly jump over to Clint, because you talked about policy, and I know that Clint is probably one of the most gifted and talented policy experts that I know. He is one of the most that I know for sure. Clint, I want you to talk a little bit about, some of the conversations that you've been having, not just policy, but I know that policy, you have a real passion for where policy fits into this conversation. But you've been talking with corporate, faith, international, and ally groups about social justice. So what would you share in terms of common threads that you're observing in these conversations?
Thank you, Gigi. And one of the biggest common threads I've seen is that if you are Pakistani, if you are Asian, if you are African, if you are Caribbean, everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has a burden to bear. And when we think we're bearing them by ourselves, we are lost. It's only when we come together and we share our stories and look for our commonalities. We had a discussion about people, about the color of your skin, colorism. In many cultures, Asian cultures, African cultures, American culture, the darker your skin in some instances, the more low caste you are, or you're deemed to be less attractive, intelligent, etc. These commonalities are things that we need to know about ourselves, and we need to know about other cultures as well, so that we don't find ourselves perpetuating that same behavior. The second thing I found is that the word racism, far from being just a descriptor, has been something that people really internalize and are highly offended at the suggestion that they may harbor a racist view or have engaged in racist behavior. We will never be able to start to attack some of the systems of racism until we can get past the point where people don't feel personally offended. The Attorney General of the United States was before the House of Representatives yesterday, and he was asked the question, is there systemic racism in law enforcement? He said no. And to back up his point, he said he had two conversations, one with Tim Scott, the African-American Republican in the United States Senate, and another friend of some standing in the community. And based on his own views and his conversations with those two people, he determined that there was no systemic racism in law enforcement. There is. And if the Attorney General of the United States can't see it, that means we have a lot of work to do among ourselves. And we have to depersonalize this term, understand what it means, and then work as a united community in ending it, being anti-racist. So those are two of the things that I've seen. And I've been more encouraged lately than I've ever been in my 53 years on this earth.
Well, that's good news, Clint, that you're encouraged. And I think that, as long as we know that racism is alive and well, then we have a job to do. And the only way that we're going to really address it is by being open, transparent, leaning in, and calling people on it when they are expressing a lack of knowledge, or when they just don't understand what unconscious bias is, for that matter. There are lots of folks who really just think they are not racist. However, behavior or actions speak louder than words. And so with that, Mark Madrid, I want to hear what your thoughts are, and how does COVID-19 play into all of this?
Oh, Gigi, thank you. Everybody listening, the bottom line is we've lost nearly 150,000 lives. I want us to all think about that for a second. Nearly 150,000 lives, and our minority communities are disproportionately affected and afflicted. So there is a correlation here of what we're talking about. with the pandemic that we're experiencing. And there's no end in sight. And so I want to reiterate that we empathize with our sisters and brothers of the Asian American community who suffer from COVID and being referred, this inappropriate phrase of being referred to as a Chinese virus. That is inappropriate, and we will not stand for it. Because as you've heard, we are witnessing verbal abuse, assaults, and much worse. And I want to give this moment an undistracted microphone to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, just 5 days ago. And this should be publicized everywhere. On every headline should cover this story. Just 5 days ago, it cites that long-standing systemic health and social inequities have put many people from racial and ethnic minority groups at increased risk of getting sick and dying from COVID-19. The term racial and ethnic minority groups includes people of color with a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, but some experiences are common to many people within these groups, and social determinants of health have historically prevented them from having fair opportunities for economic, physical, and emotional health. There is an increasing evidence that some racial and ethnic minority groups are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19 inequities in the social determinants of health, such as poverty, healthcare access, and affecting these groups are interrelated and influence a wide range of health and quality of life outcomes and risks. To achieve health equity, barriers must be removed so that everyone has a fair opportunity to be as healthy as possible. This is from the CDC. We need the CDC at the microphone. We need these revelations to be put out not only to our communities, but those who perhaps can't empathize. Nira, thanks for bringing that to the table, and all of you with your powerful stories. But we need a dialed up sense of empathy. And this is for all Americans. This is actually published with our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and we need to pay attention, and I couldn't agree more. So thanks for your question. We don't want this number to go to 250,000 or 500,000, and it just might. That is the bottom line, and we need to wake up to that reality. All of us together. We're certainly doing it here, but we invite those who perhaps can't empathize with us at the moment to open your heart and minds to the information that is out there, the studies, and these words.
Thank you, Mark. So powerful. And Mark, you know that your parents too are in our thoughts and prayers. I just don't want us to leave this conversation without acknowledging that you are suffering through that right now with your parents. And certainly they're in our hearts and minds. Jeff, why do you think Asian Americans don't seem to get support or notice? Why do you think that is?
Well, thanks, Gigi. Let me just quickly say that earlier with Nira and you mentioned about the respect and the empowerment. I think that's a key essence of all we need. Everyone. Mark talked about all the hard facts. That's something that we need to look hard into, and a lot to do with the leadership in government level, how we come together and in line look at the data. I want to take a little bit further on Nydia's the story earlier. My experience in multicultural marketing has really told me an awful lot. The fact is, Asian Americans is a very diverse and complex community of over 35 Asian ethnic subgroups. And each of us have a very different culture and nuances and history and preference. As you know, that we have distinct voices, we speak different languages, but there are even bias, not just among us in different Asian groups, but also toward non-Asians. Those are the facts that we cannot deny. But one of the major common denominator is that Asians generally, we acquire a lot. Most of us are immigrants or son and daughter of immigrants. Unfortunately, Asian Americans, the caste as a model minorities, tend to stay in line and do not make a lot of noises. And so we suffer injustice with very few notes. And for those that knew, whether in mainstream media, corporate America, government, federal, state, or local level, had done little about it. When we talk about, unlike the African American and Hispanic community, what Clint was mentioned earlier, when something bad happens in their community, they are more likely to get attention of mainstream media, as well as the corporations and government. But Asian communities suffer in silence. We often feel inconsequential, we like outsider, and it's also those that we don't belong here, although we are American too. We pay taxes, we serve in the military, and we contribute to the vitality of the country. Mark, you say very well. I think that we empathize with Black and Hispanic for the anguish, and you bear the brunt of COVID-19 as a frontline worker, disproportionately the victim and the hero. We also feel the pain and racism that has been going on for far too long for African Americans. And we have to learn so much from your community of unity in fighting justice. And this is why I'm happy to be here, and thanks to USPAACC, that all of us here, Black, Hispanic, Asian Americans, we are all at the same table to discuss the racial relationships in a large public forum like this.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much. And I think you're absolutely right. Suffering in silence is not a good thing. And if we all understand the culture, if I am culturally competent, then it's my job to reach out to you and to pull you into the dialogue and to make sure that your needs are amplified and that they are addressed. That's what real community and solidarity is. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, that perspective. All right, we're going to move into our next, yes, thank you. We're going to move into our next round. I'm going to ask our panelists, we're going to move a little more swiftly because we need to get to answers. So we've talked about these issues and shared our perspectives, identified some problems. What does the future hold? Where do we go from here? And so what can each of us as citizens do to create more harmony among us with our distinct voices and make an asset of these commonalities? I'm going to start with you, Jeff. Let's come back to Jeff.
Did you call me Gigi? I'm sorry, I missed it.
I called Jeff, but Nira, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Is that Nydia or Nira? Nydia. Why don't we start with Nydia? Sorry about that.
We are on the second round, but I had just a quick mention from the previous question of the backlash that is very important for this conversation. So I'm just going to mention that for a second, because when Clint brought the class system, he mentioned class. And India, growing up in India, I just want to relate an incident because
oh yes, please do, and I apologize for that. Go ahead, please share.
Yes, so the caste system in India, of course, was prevalent, and it was abolished in 1948. So, of course, I did not grow up in that, but I grew up with the after effects of that on the community. So when I was in pre-med, I scored 92% and I wanted to be a doctor. So I felt, oh, I'm going to be in the medical school I wanted to go of my choice. However, I did not get in, but there was a classmate of mine, my dear friend, and she scored 60% and she got in. Of course, there was affirmative action. And why I'm bringing that is because that was the experience that I personally went through in India growing up. Now, fast forward here, I exactly saw the same thing, which is great because the society that had been wronged because of those things that, again, based on skin color, your caste, we are always judging people. And when I saw that here, I said, wow, now the Black community, or there's affirmative action. And that's when that education I talk about, I really read deeper into it. The cases in my law school, like Board versus, Brown versus Board of Education, and the Regents of University, Baki. And I thought, well, these are recent cases. And this was going on. So of course we need to give opportunities, but we have to balance equity with equality. So that
Yes.
was that piece I wanted to mention, that I grew up with that and I experienced this, so I can totally relate to how things are in America as well. And Gigi, another backlash I want to mention was 9/11. Because we look no different than people from Pakistan, Indian and Pakistan look alike. So I remember that time after 9/11, when we were confused with someone from Pakistan, and we said, no, I'm from India. Many times I had to say that. But again, are all Pakistanis bad? Are all Indians bad? Are all police force bad? You see what I'm saying, where I'm getting there? Is that
Yes.
not everybody is bad. So these expressions or the perceptions and the stereotypes we create should be abolished right from its root. So education is, again, I'm going to come back to education. And then your question about where do we go from here? I'm just going to start from there, and then maybe Jeff can go next, Gigi. Where do we go from here? Is healing must start now. How many Rodneys and Georges and Richards have to die before we realize that it's going to be too late and then more violence? It's got to start with compassionate hearts, with understanding each other's cultures, what we've gone through, what we've suffered. Those are real stories. They are not to be ignored. So if we can have a conversation, dialogue between us, I think that will create a lot of understanding, because like I mentioned earlier, when I call those boys at home, or I have open houses for Diwali in my subdivision, they just look forward to that every year. So what is it, the most commonality? Look how beautiful the culture is. Look how she wears this outfit that's beautiful. Oh, I mean, I just love the music, the black, the hip hop, everything. I love it. My son grew with it. So we revere those athletes and, the musicians, but as yet we condemn the Black community for some reason. So I just feel like that's where the healing has to start. And Clint just again mentioned about our Attorney General not realizing that there is systemic racism here that has to be uprooted from its root. And that's where we need to go from here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for getting me back on track too. I really appreciate that. Clint, let's go ahead and not Clint, I'm sorry, Jeff. Let's hear from you, and then we'll move on to Clint.
Yes, thank you. I would just pick up what Nara said, the lab actually exactly. We're a lot of we think alike, and of course, education is the key. But there are 2 points particularly I want to bring up. The first thing, what Nydia was mentioned about, if you hear those heartbroken stories, actually there are 2,000 more. But more important and more even sadder is, beside all this incident, there's very little help, there's very little resource available. What we go from here after we tell the story. So while many Asian American individuals and organizations took actions and make changes similar to Nydia was doing, and for a lot of TV stations, there's very little collective effort. And so the information of hate crime against Asian Americans and the resource that could help the victim are scattered all over the country. So our agency and Mauritius and several organizations, we come together and we form a partnership, including NextSharks, which is the media, Johns Hopkins University, their professor with the data, they're gathering with all the hate crime, Act to Change, a nonprofit organizations to call for the actions, hate is virus, and many, many more. The purpose is not only to collect and centralize the information, the data, we also to create a map with all the hate crimes that are happening around the country. We create an interactive dashboard that helps individuals as well as the organization. You can provide support and resources for legal protections, mental health assistance, as well as raise funds to those Asian American small business that was destroyed or hurt the most during the time. On the second point, same thing as similar to media I was mentioned earlier. we need open communication and education.
Mm-hmm.
Among Asian Americans, as well as other ethnic groups, there's a bias among Asians ourselves. We have to recognize that, as even scenario you mentioned about, even with the Indian and Pakistani groups as well. We should be able to talk about our own bias and not to point finger, but to learn, to understand, and not be afraid to open a dialogue. Like Gigi, you mentioned about it, right? The respect or mutual respect, as well as empowerment. I think just like Black Lives Matter, when everyone step in and become part of the missions, all hands on deck, and people of all colors speaking together in one voice. I think that's powerful change for the benefit of all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very good. All right. And Nydia, what is the solution?
I love what you just said, Jeff, that it is all hands on deck. I could not agree with you more wholeheartedly. And again, as I look at this just incredible panel, I feel so encouraged that we are indeed in a place where we can create change and really make a difference. And I really believe that that is the silver lining out of all of this. I think that my biggest message again is just, especially to the Asian American community, to be loud, to persist. Do not accept ignorance or prejudice or racism. I think, Gigi, part of the reason why your story about your mom going back to that school so resonated with me and so struck me is because I'll tell you, I think there are very few Asian American parents, at least in my day when I was growing up, who would have had that same response. And I hope that today, as an Asian American parent myself, I hope I do exactly what your mom did, and I plan on it if something like that were to happen to my own children. And I think it's so important that we do decide that enough is enough, right, for our community and for others. And so the other thing that I want to talk about is how important it is, again, to be an ally and to build coalitions and to get outside of our bubbles, to connect with other people so that then we can work together. You know, one of the things that I am chronically concerned about and trying to ring the alarm bell about is the model minority myth. You know, it is at its core anti-Black. You know, it was created to say to the Black community, hey, look at Asian Americans. They overcame challenges and discrimination, and look at what exceptional people they have become. And it absolutely discounts how most Asian Americans came to this country and how Black people came to this country, and the hundreds of years of oppression and slavery that have led to the systemic and institutional racism that we have right now. And so I just, again, I call out for solidarity and just action for all of us to work together, because again, as you were saying, Jeff, I could not agree more. It is true that you know, our voice sometimes is not only silent, but then when we do speak, I feel like sometimes it's hard to get heard. And, you know, as a journalist, throughout my career, I have been in almost every newsroom in which I've worked, the only Asian American. And certainly the only Asian American, and certainly there have not been any Asian Americans in leadership at the media companies at which I've worked. So I've never had an Asian American executive producer, assistant news director, certainly not a general manager. And so I also think that it's really important that as parents now, we encourage our children to go into a diversity of professions so that our voices can be heard and amplified. And, you know, I'm working really hard with our leadership to make sure that all of our stories, not just Asian American stories, but all of our stories are told, and told in such a way that they're not exceptionalized, so that it's not, our story is just not part of a special franchise or a special feature, but that we are part of the mainstream news stories that are told every single day in every single show.
Very good. Very good, Nydia. Thank you so much. And real quickly, Clint, and then Mark, and then we're going to start to wrap this conversation up because I know Susan Allen, and I think everyone else on this call knows Susan as well. And for us to have a productive conversation, it has to end on time. So with that, Clint, what do you think?
I can't say much more than has already been said. To Neera's point, as someone who has been mistaken for a person who is Pakistani or Indian, and the fear that my family had in the aftermath of 9/11 for my personal safety, that actually is a really good frame and metaphor for how we should be thinking about each other. You know, one could say, I'm not Indian, I'm not Pakistani, I'm not an other, I'm something else. That's not the way that you should be reacting to these things. This is why hate crimes, the term hate crime is for someone who is the object of a crime because of their actual or perceived characteristics. Mm-hmm. So I use that as a frame to say whether we are X, Y, and Z or not, we should behave more like we are. Because it's only when we start stepping into those spaces and defending ourselves, defending our brothers and sisters, that's the only way that you're going to get real change in this country. And we're a very powerful group of people. If you look at the people who are represented on this Zoom call, our political support, our economic power, we can do a lot if we can keep it together. If we fall into the same old trap that a lot of people are laying for us, to engage in otherism, then we will continue to be mired in discrimination and powerlessness. So I'm a big fan of coalition building. Nydia, I couldn't say it better than you did.
Excellent. Mark?
Oh, remarkable words by all of you. And so thank you. I've talked about empathy and antecedents to equity, and also a positive correlation between COVID and institutionalized racism. But I want to come back to my bread and butter, which is entrepreneurship, and attacking, and I'm fanatically excited about this, attacking the albatross of funding bias and access to capital. Not just saying we've got to increase access to capital, but what are you going to do about it? So 5 quick solutions. One is to engage with our national banking partners, regional banks and community banks to re-engineer technology, leverage fintech, and to make a new commitment to minority businesses and enterprises. Thank you, Wells Fargo, for that $400 million commitment to small businesses, a good chunk that comes to minority businesses. Number 2, we need to put some more fuel behind the CDFIs and minority depository institutions. Look what happened during the PPP round 1. Some of these CDFIs saved the day, so we need to increase their capacity over time for more lending opportunities. Number 3, we need to bring in the public and private sector. They need to become involved in these solutions. And the 4th thing that I would say is we need to invest in Hispanic American, Asian American, and Black American founders. And the 5th and final step is to surround all these recommendations with dialed up empathy and compassion, because that is something that we can control.
Great. This has been quite a conversation. I have to tell you, we were planning a quick round robin. I don't know if I trust this group to do a round robin of one word, Susan. So I'm going to just, I'm channeling Susan, and she's saying, okay, Gigi, get it done. And so in the spirit of getting it done, thank you for the wonderful conversation, panelists. It is obvious that we need to have more of these conversations. The themes that I picked up on are many. I have a whole list of themes in my head that I heard discussed today. And I think it's compassion, it's caring for one another, it's cultural competency, it is really activism, Nydia. Stand up and shout out. do something. If you see something, say something, do something. And then let's do it all together so that it's powerful and there's a powerful end to it. I would just want to thank Susan once again. I'm going to turn the mic back over to you, Susan, because I know you have some things that you want to say before we end today. And thank you so much again for having me do this. This is the intersection of my life. You know, I like you know, Susan, and others may not know, that Greenville experience was crazy. My mother grew up with Reverend Jackson, met him when I was a child. My first job was at the Urban League in Greenville, South Carolina. My mother's best friend who introduced her to my dad was Lottie Gibson. Her husband was the chairman of the NAACP. And so the work that I do today, and my family were entrepreneurs actually. So the work that I do today and this opportunity is really great. It's very personal. And thank you, my friend Susan Allen, for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Gigi. Thank you so much, and all for this leading this very motivating conversation. I couldn't have asked for more, and our panelists for your incredible insight. So now I'd like to bring back Jimmie to come and share her thoughts about what she thinks about this conversation. Has changed her mind, added some more spice to what she's already been doing for herself and through Wells Fargo. Jimmie, floor is yours.
So thank you, first of all, Susan, for the vision of bringing this group together and having this conversation. I thought that it was incredibly powerful. And I'd like to thank the panelists for taking the time to be here and for their candor and transparency, and Gigi for the thoughtful questions. You know, I think what I'm walking away with is we hope that the conversation has been educational for everybody that had the opportunity to listen to it, and for those that listened to it on the replay. And that it inspires them in some way to engage. You know, I find people asking me, what can I do? What should I do? And I think the first thing is to really educate yourself, to make yourself uncomfortable and speak with someone who may be from a different background or culture and begin the conversation. Tell your story, hear their story, let things grow from there. I think the second thing is to potentially engage with an organization whose mission inspires you, that is doing something powerful in this space right now, whether it's a diverse chamber, whether it's a nonprofit that's focused on youth, that's focused on education, that's focused on job training, but engage in some way around the issue, whether it's with your volunteer time or with your resources. The third thing I would say is to help inspire others to become an ally. You know, frequently it is those of us that are on the call that are asked, you know, called upon to tell our stories, to inspire people to action. And we need all of us, but we need allies as well. And, you know, we've been able to inspire that type of engagement at Wells, and it really has made a difference in advancing our diversity and inclusion work. So, powerful conversation. Thank you for the vision, Susan, and to all the speakers. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jimmie, also for your leadership and your support. Now we know what we could do to be part of the solution for an America where we all could come together in unity. We could fight racism, overcome racism and pandemic at the same time. We can walk and chew gum, right?
That's
we
right.
could crank up our very busy, productive, and prosperous and money-making American engine, and put us back into the days when we could all be happy, healthy, and safe. So I want to, at this time now, bring back Kwali, the CEO of K-Vibe TV, also president of our Northeast chapter, regional chapter, come on the screen with us, together with the entire panel, with Gigi and Jimmie, to thank all our viewers and audience for sticking with us for this extra couple of minutes so that we can, together in unison, say thank you. Kwa, would you come and show us all of us? Where are you, Kwa? Okay.
Here we are.
This is your
The Brady Bunch.
Speaker, Kwa, the television producer, and Gigi. Where are you, Gigi?
I'm right here.
There you go. And Jimmie, thank you so much. So what I want to do to tell you that this is just the beginning. Our national conversation on race relationship will continue. Just stay tuned. In the meantime, let us hear from you because we want to know what you think. So email us, follow us, share, and like us on YouTube, Facebook, and everything else that you can think of. Bye for now.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
You are the summer, we were the tide, the clearest of azure, bright as your
Thank you,
eyes.
everyone. If anyone's still on the call, and what a great conversation.
Okay, Carl, bring us back. Can we all get back on the car?